got to vote.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
There have been a lot of forces opposing women's vote. Obviously, every woman lives with a man,
Right.
and the man will have told her what to vote. So why should they? It is just a waste of public funds. Just recently, there was an amendment to the US Constitution prohibiting the consumption of alcohol, which is a substance that, according to some, enhances your capabilities, but according to others, it destroys individual and society. And America refused to ratify the League of Nations, which is this supranational structure that is just not to the advantage of the United States. So lots and lots of things. I am personally very excited about powered flight becoming more and more available.
I heard that's just getting off the ground.
It has been getting off the ground, absolutely. And what else? It is just an exciting time with incredible leaps of science and technology. And of course, there was a big war in Europe, but I bet it is the last one, because we learned that it is horrible, and we must never repeat it.
So, what sort of technologies do you foresee your grandchildren having?
We just had, actually, quite recently, the first what is called radio broadcast. And it was between Pittsburgh and another city in the United States. So this technology that enables people to talk and other people to hear the first talking. Many people can hear a person talking, or music, you know. An orchestra can perform, and this orchestra can be heard by thousands rather than just a few dozen people. Is also very, very exciting. Rather than the telegraph, which is just for those who know Morse code. Very useful, but you need to be an expert. So I see a great future for radio technology.
Radio technology, wow. What about long-range communication? What about flight? What about getting into space? Do you think we'll be able to do that? Or is that just too far?
So there's this Frenchman called Jules Verne, and he has been writing some amazing novels of flight. And there has been actually in the CinemaScope, there has been a movie about his ideas of how we could have a huge cannon shooting people to the moon. It was extremely entertaining, with moon people being extremely surprised about receiving Earth people visiting them.
What do you think the moon people would say?
Well, we have never seen them, so would they have been aware of us? I think they would. So they wouldn't be as surprised as it has been depicted in the movie. And that is, I think, the question. Just because we don't see something, that is not any indication of a symmetry of these other eventual things not seeing us. And so when you think about space, a lot of people, I would have to check my encyclopedia if Mr. Hubble has been born yet. But if he has, and he has been observing what eventually he called the nebula, that would represent a huge expansion of what we think about when we think about space. and the boundaries of our ignorance would just expand tremendously, right? So when one thinks about space, that is what he should think about. Um, there was also a conference in Europe organized by Mr. Hilbert, who listed the 10 problems that he was sure once solved, mathematics would be over. And this was somewhat similar to what Mr. Kelvin stated a few decades ago when he said that physics was practically over. And since then we observed radioactivity and we started trying to explore the nature of the atom. And Lord Kelvin's predictions of physics being over have been totally upended. So, will Hilbert be right of mathematics being completed soon? Unlikely. And that is, I think, the point that we can and we should be thrilled about our journey just continuing rather than ending. And what should we do then when the journey ended? Should we just pretend that we are back at Adam and Eve in Eden? That is not a goal that we should even be seeking. So, to the continuation of the journey.
You sound like you come from the future.
Actually, if I did, then I would know that the only place to be is 2010 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where the only necessary time travelers conference has been organized. Because of course, every time traveler from any point in time can just get together in 2010. I see transhumanism as a process, as a work in progress, as a desire, and as long as people who don't subscribe to that specific program or desire or goal set realize that it's fine, that I respect their freedom of not to follow my path. As long as they respect my freedom to do it, it is okay not to share our points of view. And so, for me, the rich set of ideas and our internal litigious fractions and factions and political discrepancies and sometimes quite heated arguments are just part of the deal. They are great. And actually, in the family, in the group of singularitarian or posthumanist or transhumanist, futurist, immortalist, etc., 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 factions, the differences are always smaller than the differences we can have with other people, other groups, especially those who don't subscribe to the power of reason and who don't share our enthusiasm for the scientific method. That is a huge gap. So I'm extremely conscious of how important it is to try and bridge that gap. And I am not at all concerned with the differences that we have amongst ourselves. I am interested not only in analyzing and understanding the meaning of our shared values and understanding of what are social norms, but how do these overlap and interact with our own individual evolving value systems. It is quite common to attribute youthful experimentation to people at an age where they are open to all kinds of alternatives, and then perceive that they settle down and they become much less interested in exploring those, but they follow on a given path that they have chosen or that society gave them. So I always watch somebody saying what they think about society, and I ask myself, is it their subjective judgment that changed rather than society? And sometimes that is definitely the case. The way they look at society is different. On the other hand, there are objective measures, obviously, of how our capability of embracing needs and values that previously were deemed unimportant or only of a minority not worthy of our respect are now being embraced. Racial, sexual, cognitive freedoms, I think, for example, are going to be the next, where we will accept that society's role is not that of dictating a given norm of cognitive behavior. And you know, there are countries where insane asylums have been eliminated. There is, in Italy, for example, there is no such a thing as an insane asylum. As long as you are not violent towards yourself or towards the others, you can be technically insane but free. It is very interesting that this has been done already quite a few years ago, and it is a huge advancement in understanding what it means to be free, but it hasn't been fully understood what the consequences are, of course. That people who are crazy will be a natural burden on, for example, their families or on society at large. But the courage of a country, of a nation, to say we are ready to take on that burden is admirable.
Well, do you think there might be an enhanced generation of uber augmented people that'll cause some form of class divide? Like, will there be classism as a result of some people having access to technology and other people having not as much access to these augmented?
Yes, there will be, just as there is today. And the reason that there would be is not a reason not to develop those technologies that would benefit a given group of wealthy individuals first. It has been the case that a large number of technologies have only been available to a few. This has always been the case, and now they are available to most or everybody. Not only that, but actually it would be irresponsible to deny the opportunity to the larger number of people to gain from access to that technology, just because we don't want the first adopters to get what some see as an unfair advantage. So, yes, that is how it is, and it is not going to be a problem.
Okay. Well, what are you optimistic about with regards to transhumanism?
People are happy to experiment, and the tools of experimentation, hacking, and DIY, and understanding technology, gadgets, but now understanding their bodies, the way their minds work, and just go and try things out is incredibly fascinating and empowering. And this is having, in my opinion, an extremely healthy ripple effect, where things that we have been very uptight about become much more openly discussed and much more conducive to a shared understanding. In the 50s or 60s, there would be a very, very specific dress code in the workplace, for example. And everybody would have their own place as a corporate man, and they would know what the ladder that they needed to climb and how to climb it. Today, the workplace is much more chaotic, much more challenging, but also much more engaging and interesting. And this manifests itself in a relaxed dress code, freedom of just dressing the way you want to dress. So the types of weaknesses that today we are not ready to talk about, our illnesses, our non-mainstream desires or tendencies, whether sexual, behavioral, or our curiosities or laziness, are, I think, going to be readily shared because of this DIY culture and our realization that we are similarly human in our strengths and weaknesses. Automation is a technology that started really accelerating a couple of 100 years ago. First, agricultural jobs got better through plows and animals and steam and so on. Then industrial jobs got better through machines. So much so that today in our society only a fraction of low percentage points of population can feed everybody else. 3–4% of the population produces enough food for 100% of the population. And the same with our manufacturing industries. Let's say an additional 10% of the population produces the industrial objects that 100% of the population then takes advantage of. Everybody else is in the so-called service or creative industries, and we are already seeing signs of the next wave of automation that comes from people much rather using an app on their smartphone than talking to a call center where somebody with a foreign accent will try and navigate them through the same menus, actually, that can be better presented with a smart user interface design on the phone. And then these service jobs will be lost. And supposedly we will remain with the creative jobs that require high levels of training, high levels of education, except that we have signs of creative jobs being automated as well. We have robotic experimenters carrying out biology tasks that are glimpses of PhD level work. So if PhD level cognitive work can be planned and carried out by a robot, we came full circle in covering everything that we currently think people can do in order to earn a salary. And that is, I think, the point. It's not that we will be ready to let everybody die because they cannot earn a salary. Working is not going to be the premise for eating. People will have to eat. We will not let 7 billion people die because robots are doing their work. work is not going to be a duty. Work is going to be a privilege of those who can actually do things that others appreciate. And these can be a lot of different things. You know, it can be mud wrestling, it can be space travel, it can be cooking an incredible meal, it can be playing or creating new types of art or music. And the appreciation of their work is not necessarily going to be remunerated by a salary that will enable them to feed themselves and everybody else don't, because that will be normal and available. That appreciation will translate into opportunities for creating, organizing tasks that require large numbers of people agreeing on dedicating resources to things like further understanding nature through science, or creating huge new types of art happenings, or alternate reality games involving billions of people simultaneously, or creating art on Mars or music on the moon. And we will be exposed to a variety of stimulations that are going to be, you know, impossible to explore in their totality. That is the future of what we used to call work.
What about the sewing machine? How would you compare work at the sewing machine table compared to modern day work?
It can be the same if you allow it to be the same. We had people expressing themselves artistically at sewing machines at the beginning of the 20th century. And we have people drudgingly doing data entry at computers in hours after hours of totally senseless work. So the tool doesn't define the work. I would like to remark on the fallacy of Maslow's hierarchy, which assumes that you have to satisfy certain basic material necessities, and only then you can move on to satisfy what are perceived to be higher necessities. The reason I want to make this remark is because that fallacy, in my view, is similar to pretending that human aspirations or human happiness can only be achieved with a certain tool set. That computer can make you happy, but sewing machines can't. Just as that is not true, the same with Maslow's hierarchy, where I think it becomes evident how false it is if you frame it like this. Can't poor people love? Or is the love that poor people feel for each other diminished by the fact that they are poor? Is the love or the fulfillment that rich people have in their relationship of a superior kind because they are materially rich? So when people quote Maslow's hierarchy, or when people say that in order for them to do something, oh, if they only had better tools, it's, I think, wrong. I think that we have technology solved. We know what is the recipe for attacking a problem, and as long as it is physically feasible through science and technology and through the wondrous generating power of startups and venture capital and acceptance of failure, just keep trying on a global scale, competing teams against each other until one achieves the breakthrough, that will elevate everybody to the new level and then do it again. We do not have a comparable recipe for solving interpersonal, intercultural problems across societies. We do not have, we didn't pin yet down how we can make sure that we understand each other. On a personal level, especially with couples, with partners, or between children and parents, or vice versa, within families, we have strong capabilities of empathy. And there are signs that this empathy radius is expanding. We can learn how to feel kinship towards each other at larger and larger circles. And today we have arrived at a level where when we see video recordings, news recordings of atrocities or killings on the other side of the planet, we feel the pain, we feel the horror, and we desire for it to stop. And it is extremely important that we learn how to assure that this stays so, that what happened against Jews during World War II, where German populations, even if not actively working towards killing them, have been numbed into accepting their dehumanization, that it doesn't again happen. We should learn what are the early signs, early warning signs of these kinds of mental manipulations, and to diffuse them, and to make sure that people in power cannot take advantage of them for their gain. Now, of course, the reason why this is so important is not only because it is morally right. It is very important also because unless we do learn how to expand our empathy radius in a reliable manner, and how to preempt its being destroyed, the lack of this capacity would represent an existential risk to humanity and our entire civilization. So I think that it is very important to work towards this direction.
Is transhumanism an extension of humanism?
Yes. I think that it is our interest to make sure that the definition of what is human is extended rapidly to embrace and extend towards new forms of being and living as rapidly as possible. And it is up to us whether we want to use that same term, or we want to find a new term, and then all of humanity would belong to that new term. It is just a question of settling on something. But this embracing larger and larger groups of sentient beings is not only, I think, morally right, and it is not only going in a historically desirable direction, but it is expedient, because if we don't do it, then from a biological perspective, no species lived for a very long time. On average, a few million years, and then every species went extinct. So, whether for lack of adaptability, or because another species just took over the ecological niche that the previous one occupied, this is a risk that we run. However, if we learn how to preemptively adapt, how to preemptively embrace and respect the other, whichever this other is, I think we radically increase our likelihood of going on as a species, of going on as a human enterprise, as a human plan in potentially new rich forms. The question of what it will mean to be human depends obviously of one's interpretation of the singularity, which according to many will occur before, and how radical the technological singularity, if it occurs, is going to be on the nature of the human condition. My personal view is that there is not going to be a single event that we will be able, or we should attempt to pinpoint as the singularity on a given day in 2045. There will be radical changes in an uneven manner, waves of attempts to break through to previous limitations. And the technologies that are going to be available are going to have also unforeseen consequences. So those who adopt them will make apparent leaps forward just to discover the flip side of what they were using, doing, organizing, and the advantage that appeared absolute will have shown itself to be relative or temporary. So, on average, I am optimistic about the fact that we will have multiplied our choices, and our ambition to be free to explore those choices will have stayed or increased, and we will have acquired new degrees of freedom. And the human condition will have left traces of its ambition on the moon, on the Mars, maybe further out. We will have the opportunity to live lives, human lives, in spaces that are not only our home planet, original home planet. And the reason why, of course, that is going to be a fundamentally important step is because by being a multiplanetary species, we will be able to avoid extinction due to catastrophic events like an asteroid impact that would set civilization back thousands of years. So I am very excited about the new opportunities and the new freedoms of the human condition. Interpretation of history always overlaps with one's own outlook on life. And this outlook changes through the years as one matures. And it is very common to be closer to death, one's own personal death, with an outlook that is different when one was young and had his or her life in front in its totality. I think that there is a very, very fundamental biological reason why death is such an abhorrent thing for us. We are, each of us is, and all of our cells represent an uninterrupted chain of life 4.5 billion years long. None of our cells have ever died before. And all of our cells have this biological imperative of not wanting to die. And all of them will. And so our fear of death is this cry of trillions of cells saying, why? And I think it is very interesting that biology allows 1, 2, 3, or a few more cells to attempt to keep being immortal. And these are our sperm and our eggs, and the cells that live on are our biological children. So, is our mimetic heritage, is our unique capability of transmitting our thoughts, ideas, our desires, our goals through means that are different than those biological available to organisms since billions of years. Is this equivalent or even a superior way of keep on living? I think that is a very, very important question, especially if we look at the long term, not we look at a few dozens of years, not a few 100 years, but if we look at a few billion years, as the universe potentially is shaped by the power of human thought, as it expresses itself in our technologies, and as it spreads out in not only the galaxy but across potentially galaxies, that is what we can think about, because the distance between us and descendants in a few billion years will be very large. So if we can transmit thoughts, desires, goals, opportunities from here to there, just as biology transmitted in its own way those things to us, it will have been a huge achievement. Oh, Mrs. Markstein of Keynes Avenue has been quite ill. It's reported much improved.
That's
No.
nice.
Wow. Was the burgers yet?
Mr. and Mrs. Lindquist have a prominent Detroit guest at their comfortable home.
That's the news.
Is this the news?
Well, this is like blog posts.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, a blog.
You're right.
It's a Twitter.
tweet.
But it's
Yeah, like
tweet.
a tweet.
Tweets.
So tweets that already exist in the... Yeah, I asked you to sign them.